Welcome to the first in my series of commentaries about human nature. This one I've called Social Justice Warriors Are Just Pathetic Addicts. And I'll get to why I think that being the center of attention is what they're addicted to and what gets them high. This is the Madman Rants, and I'm your host, Kevin J. Leonard. Why should you listen to me? Well, it's my job to take you from thinking like members of a tribe to thinking like leaders. My entire life I've been curious about why we human beings do the bizarre things we do, things that are oftentimes running counter to what is good for us. And what I found throughout my career, throughout my intuitions into human nature, is that I'm very good at finding threads between things that have been previously unconnected and helping people to understand the connections between them and getting people to go, oh, hadn't thought of it that way before. So you might agree with the opinions that I've got about human nature, you might not, but maybe that's the point, to get you to think with a new perspective about the way we interact and the reasons for why we do what we do. I've lived and worked all over the world, in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Mexico, and North America. I've traveled all around the world several times, and right after university, I took 2 years to hitchhike around the world with my first wife. During that time, the one thing I really found out about people, the common thread was self-interest, greed, and a lack of concern for the greater good. Yes, people can be very generous, especially to people within their family and people within their tribe, but overall there's an undercurrent of selfishness and greed that you find anywhere that you go in the world, whether it's in Africa from a tribesman killing the last rhino to get its horn in order to sell it to somebody in Yemen for a big payout, or whether it's someone jumping the line at Starbucks or barging in at a big sale to snatch something out of some little old lady's hands. I've been blogging for years about human nature and the future of the marketing industry and where it might go next. I spent most of my career working in ad agencies around the world, and most recently I've worked as a consultant here in Toronto for clients both national and local, and doing public speaking. I first became interested in human nature when I was a teenager, and I went on in university to study motivational psychology and the evolution of human behavior. One of the core things that I've picked up on in my life and in my career is that curiosity grows brains. It tends to be that people who are very curious are very high in intellectual ability, and people who are incurious, well, we have a president of the United States right now who is deeply incurious, and I think that tells you an awful lot about him. When I looked at this video a few years back, and it features Jonathan Haidt, a professor of psychology out of the US, and an undergrad, I believe her name was Viviana, who scores quite high on in the Oppression Olympics by being a female, being an undergraduate student, not a TA or a teacher, and also being a Hispanic background. And the picture really captures it all. What struck me about watching this video was, well, first of all, how bizarre it was that the school had set up this debate between several intellectuals, professors and administrators, and this young lady. But I understand that it was for goodwill purposes, public relations purposes with the student body. And it was in the early days of SJW agitation. However, what really struck me was looking at this young woman and seeing how she was behaving. What was clear from the way Jonathan was, let's say, putting up with her, and from her own quite prideful demeanor during the encounter, was that she was getting a big thrill out of this. For Mr. Haidt, it was just another day at the office, and he does a lot of these kinds of debates with serious intellectuals. But in this particular case, he was just putting in time, and I think he was also learning a great deal about what the situation was with SJWs. And I really got an awful lot, transformed my life, reading The Righteous Mind. Why good people are divided by politics and religion. And what Professor Haidt has figured out, and the research he's been doing for years and years, is the fact that people on the right and the left have one thing in common. They have grasped onto something that he calls a sacred value. And they are stuck on that thing. It is not a rational thing, it's an emotional thing. And really, it comes down to it being a religious thing. So, great book. If you haven't read it, do so. If you haven't watched any of the videos of Jonathan Haidt speaking, you should do it, because he can really blow your mind with the insights that he's got from all the research he's done around the world. And it's quite well validated. What comes up, though, whether you're looking at his work or you're looking at this video between he and this debate he had with this young lady, is the fact that IQ plays such an enormous role in human populations, in our societies, in our development as a species, and in our everyday interactions, and of course in politics as well. And the thing about IQ is that it's not as simple as we generally put it down to. There's two aspects, three actually, I'll get into that in 1 second. The first is that there's something called crystallized IQ. And crystallized IQ is the ability to memorize facts, processes, and vocabulary, like languages, and then recall and apply this knowledge quickly and accurately. So, it really is a question of regurgitation, being able to reach back into the brain and pull this stuff out, to acquire it quickly and accurately, and then be able to pull it back out again quickly and accurately. They also pointed out that there's this other kind of IQ, which is called fluid IQ. Fluid IQ is the ability to use logic in new situations, identify patterns, see new connections, and solve new problems. And what's interesting there is how many times the word new comes up. So fluid IQ is all about creation and invention. So it's all about being thrust into new situations and figuring your way out of them. So it's a conceptual ability versus a memorizing ability. So while Horn and Cattell came up with this distinction between fluid and crystallized IQ in '66, way further back there was an understanding that people who do well on one test, like the IQ test, tend to do well on all kinds of tests. And what was further discovered was that people who do well in life overall tend to be people who are good in social settings and at quote-unquote reading people, understanding, being empathetic with other people. What this was speaking to was the fact that with general intelligence, there's not just a combination between perhaps being better at fluid IQ than you are at crystallized IQ, or vice versa, but that you also have a deep ability to be empathetic and understand other people's emotions, to read people and what they're thinking, what they're feeling. Much more feeling than thinking. So, a further aspect of IQ, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, was the idea of the bell curve. And this emerged way back in 1805 from a guy named Gauss. It has since become known as the normal distribution because it's been found to be true of so many different factors in nature and in human behavior. And of course, this says that the majority of people, 68% of people, fall into this sort of general middle ground, with the median being right down the middle, and that it's very rare to find people, relatively rare, at about 16%, that are lower than 85 on the IQ scale and higher than 115. So there aren't a lot of people who are up in the really high end of the bell curve in terms of IQ. Where do these people work? Where do they function best? They tend to do well in entrepreneurial activities. They tend to do well in the academic world. They work at a high level in the university world. They are astrophysicists and mathematicians, computer scientists, etc. But the question really then is not where they work, but where it is that really smart people don't work. When you look at the problems we're seeing on university campuses in North America these days, who is it that's out there working on these political correctness and coming up with the rules and regulations and coming up with the bathroom rules, etc., etc.? I gotta say that I don't think we're seeing a lot of highly intellectual people who are working in administration and responsible for that kind of stuff, or working in the HR department of big corporations. These are not stupid people, but they're just of average intelligence. The super smart people, the people who really figure out the tough questions in life, they're not working in these departments. They're not in charge. And so the people who are working there are just regular people. What is it that motivates most people, and what is it that is driving all this stuff on campus these days having to do with social justice warriors and political correctness? Really, ego. It's very core to our human consciousness. The point is that we really like feeling good. We'll go out of our ways to find ways for ourselves to feel good. We like to feel popular. We like to feel like we're in the limelight. Again, people will go out of their way to do that. Just look at all the shows about people becoming famous. We really like to feel validated, as though we are right and that our opinion is taken seriously. We like to feel like we're in charge, like we're the boss. We like to feel smart. And Dunning-Kruger, back in 1999, proved this with a series of experiments, that people who are not so smart tend to be hanging around other people who are not so smart, who validate their opinions. Rather, they tend to look for things that will reinforce their own beliefs. And they tend to pat themselves on the back and go, geez, I must be really smart because I figured everything out. My opinion, whether it's backed up with facts or not, has to be true because everyone around me agrees with it. Whereas really smart people tend to learn more and more, and the more they learn, the more they realize they don't know everything out there, and they tend to think they're not so smart. For people who are falling prey to all this other stuff in this list, getting someone fired is almost orgasmic. It makes them feel like, wow, look at what power I've got. For most of my life, perhaps I haven't felt all that powerful. And now as a social justice warrior, I can actually get a professor, a senior person whose life and family depends on their reputation and their earnings in the university. I can get them fired just by doing protests. That's tremendously fulfilling feeling. Social justice warriors are just pathetic addicts. They really are. They're being the center of attention gets them high, and they love that feeling, and they want to go back and get it again and again. And it's not really their fault, because as I've learned more about human nature throughout my life, I've really come to the conclusion, and we're seeing more and more proof of this in research that's being done around the world, that we human beings, we are hardwired for addiction. It helped us to evolve over the last 7 million years since we split from the chimpanzees, genetically speaking. So what is true about human beings, even more so than with many other species, and the first studies that were done into addiction was the stuff that we did share with other species, like with rats and apes and monkeys, that we can become addicted to drugs, etc., etc. However, what we now know is that human beings will endlessly repeat anything that rewards our brains with a pleasurable spike of hormones and or chemicals. Hormones are chemicals at a relatively low cost to us. We're not talking about heroin addiction. We're talking about how you get started on these things, which starts out by someone giving it to you for free and not wanting to do it all the time. So it's relatively low cost, with little thought to long-term consequences. Human beings tend to fall into this pattern of addictive behavior anytime that something is presented to them that fulfills these three things. So thinking about that then, what is addictive? Smartphones. Are they addictive? Are they not? Most young people today and adults will tell you, hell yeah, they are very addictive. Texting is addictive. Sex can be addictive. Gambling, we know, can be addictive. We've seen the tanning lady some years back who showed up and took her little, I think it was her granddaughter, into a tanning booth with her. Maybe she wasn't a grandma. She just looked like a grandma because she tanned too much. Maybe she was just a mom. Tattooing, highly, highly addictive. So it's not really a choice that you're making when you obsess about tattooing and what you'll get next and how you'll get it. And yes, it's painful, but that's the price that you're paying at relatively low cost to keep doing it and prove that you're a part of a tribe, the cool people. Gaming, highly addictive. Tweeting is addictive if you look at the U.S. current president. Working out. People who are addicted to working out and getting that high of running or cycling or doing a whole bunch of different things will, if pressed, admit that it's kind of addictive. Shopping has been proven to be highly addictive. Fishing and hunting. These guys, friends of mine, who are addicted to obsessing over thinking about, oh my God, next weekend I'm going to go fishing. I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours in a boat doing nothing but waiting for that little thrill that I get, or waiting for that deer to come around the corner. Highly addictive. Eating. All the addicts of the world who are overweight, they are not just low willpower and can't push away from the table. They are addicted. They can't stop it, and they have to eat 3 times a day. So how are they ever going to give up on that addiction? The same thing goes with the opposite side of the spectrum, purging, anorexia, nervosa, and bulimia. Plastic surgery. Michael Jackson was addicted to plastic surgery. Many, many women and many men are addicted to plastic surgery. So looking at that list, I mean, are you addicted to anything on that list? Is there other stuff out there that you know of that probably is addictive? For people that are problematic, for people that have obsessive compulsive disorder, people that are depressed, people that are socio or psychopathic, there is something that they do, and they do it relentlessly, like any addict, and it disaffects their life. It ruins their lives. It lowers the quality of their lives. And yet they cannot stop doing this thing. And that's giving in to their own impulses of their brains. Their brains say to them, why don't you do this next? And off they go and they do it. And they do that not just because they can't control themselves, but because when they do, what their brain's whim was, hey, why don't we go over and straighten up all those magazines now? Make them all arranged by the right size, and et cetera, et cetera. What those people are doing is giving in to addiction. Their brain is rewarding them with a little burst of dopamine and saying, well done. You did what I, the brain, wanted you to do, and I'm going to give you a little reward. Good for you. Now, I'd like to share with you a little story. The story is not about this dog exactly, but about a dog like this. I was working for a client who had a waiting room in their office, and was working in that front room, and overheard some shouting going on outside of the waiting room. It was on the ground floor. There was a lady out there who had her cell phone out, and she was shouting and carrying on and shouting at the window of the office, screaming something, and I couldn't make it out until I got outside. And of course she was quite pleased to see me come out, I think, because now she had a one-on-one personal audience. And she was shouting that there was a dog, quote unquote, trapped in this car. And this was the summertime in Toronto, and the car was in the shade of the building. All the windows were rolled down. The dog wasn't panting, he was just sitting there. And he even had a bowl of water beside him. And she was screaming, there's a law against locking dogs in hot cars, and I'm going to call the police. The person responsible is going to go to jail. By this point, the owner of the dog and the car had come out, and she was standing there biting her nails, going, I don't know, should I take the dog? And I kind of stepped in and said, lady, what is it that you're going on about? Like, the dog is in an open car in the shade. It's not hot. The law is there to stop dogs from dying in the heat. Why are you carrying on like this? And she went back to her cell phone, and she was talking to her husband, who happened to be sitting in the car. So what occurred to me in watching this lady was that she was getting a real thrill out of this theatrical performance, and her husband clearly was not enjoying it all that much, and he probably had seen it before. But it occurred to me that I wasn't getting anywhere by trying to argue rationally with her. So I stopped and looked at her and I said, hang on a second, ma'am. I said, how do you feel right now? And she stopped and she looked at me and she said, well, I'm angry. I'm upset. I said, yeah, but like, how are you really feeling inside yourself at this moment? Are you feeling unhappy or happy? She said, well, I'm unhappy. I said, what else? And I said, you're feeling pretty good, aren't you? She said, what do you mean? I said, you're feeling in charge, aren't you? Like, this is, as far as your day goes and your week, maybe your month goes, this is the first time you've had a chance to really stand up and take charge, to threaten somebody and a business with legal action and calling the police. It feels pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, look at you, you're all charged up. You're feeling great at this moment. I said, and that's fantastic. But it's kind of disrupting, and I took out my cell phone and I said, it's kind of disrupting our business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the police and I'm going to have them come over and ask you to explain why you are going on a tirade about something that is not actually the intent of the law. The intent of the law is to break dogs out of hot cars where they're frying to death inside the hot car, not this situation. I said, so I'm going to have you explain to them why you are interrupting our business and threatening this nice lady here who is treating her dog really well just for you to get a big charge and a big thrill out of it. Well, halfway through this last bit, she already turned around, stomped off, cursing under her breath, got into her car, and said to her husband, come on, Harvey, or whatever his name was, let's go. And she shook the phone at me as she drove off, going, you haven't heard the end of this. I'm still going to speak to the police. And off she went. But what occurred to me in that moment was, OMG, there's something going on here. And what it is this addiction that social justice warriors have fallen prey to. This wish to repeat ad infinitum self-righteous indignation. It feels fantastic. It feels good to people to feel indignant about something. They have fallen prey to this thrill they get out of being in the limelight. They've probably never really been in the limelight their entire lives, outside of standing up in front of maybe their high school to do a play. And number 3, feeling empowered. They feel not just in the limelight, but they suddenly feel empowered, perhaps even empowered enough to take someone's livelihood away from them and ruin their lives and their families' lives. Wow, what a great feeling for a young person who's just gone into university and has never had a job, has never been empowered to do virtually anything. So that led me to think about what could be done to disempower SJWs. When confronting them on campus or out in front of the courthouse or wherever they're going on their most recent tirade, what can we do to disempower them, to pull the rug out from under them without resorting to Antifa's violence or anything else? And I think that the way that we can do that best is by taking a moment and saying, hang on, I'm here to listen to you. I'm curious. What is your core issue? If you have to distill it down to a single thing that you're trying to accomplish today, and you can only choose one thing, what is it that you're trying to do? What is your point that you're trying to get across? Are you standing up for example, for fairness for everybody? Is that what this is all about? Or is it all about protecting others' feelings, i.e. political correctness? Or is it that you're all about wanting to do the right thing and that's why you're out here today? Or is it standing up for what you believe in and that's the reason you're here today when it boils right down to it? And then the question that becomes, okay, so you've identified the one thing that is most important to you to get across today, but why is that thing right? Why is it worth standing up for? Is it because it just seems right to you? Like it just feels right to you? Is that the thing that's kind of motivating you? Or is it what you've been taught? Like, is it like what your parents brought you up to think is right? Or like, is it a religious thing? Is it the holy book that tells you that is right? Is it the fact in your mind that it's any decent person would agree with your point? And you're upset that not everyone seems to? Is it that this issue makes you feel passionate? Is that the thing that makes it the right thing to be standing up for? The point is, they're feelings. They're not actually rational arguments. Even quoting the Holy Book is not a rational argument. It's just quoting something that some people wrote down a long time ago and you happen to believe, quote unquote, in. You have faith in it. It's not that that's factually correct. So the point is that these are feelings, not rational arguments. And when there is no rationale, then what we're talking about, according to Jonathan Haidt and all of his research, is a sacred value. Whether these people are more conservative leaning or more liberal leaning, right or left, they have adopted these sacred values that they hold very close to their heart. They're not rational arguments. They are these things that have become sacred to them. So the question then to them in this, now we've identified what it is that they're there for today and why they think it's right, is, well, okay, now hang on a second. I'm not dissing you in any way, but I want to know how it is right now that you're feeling. So how do you feel in this moment in the middle of your protest, or after, let's hope? Do you feel in this moment like you're charged up, you're energized? Do you feel indignant? Is that the way that you're feeling when you check your inside, feelings, what's welling up inside you? Do you feel powerful in this moment? Is that something that you could identify inside if you look inside? Do you feel holier than thou? Do you feel like, you're standing on the pulpit and you've got the right way and no one else does? Is that something that you're feeling? Do you feel validated maybe in this moment? Like finally you've got some people with you and you're being taken seriously? Is that the way that you feel? So once you've got out of them their feelings, what they're feeling in the moment, and going back, of course, to the point that if they have no rationale, if we're just talking feelings, then this is a sacred value that they're talking about. Then the question or the statement to them becomes, so this isn't like a thesis that you're doing in university, that you have fact-based points to back up your position, and you've reached, you've gone back to the library and you've got a well-argued point. It's more like it's a sacred thing for you right now, like almost a religious thing, right? Because it's all about your feelings, and you don't really have a strict argument behind it. And sacred things, they're not really rational, are they, by definition? They're based on faith. They're based on belief, and you're feeling that they're right. So it's a belief, this thing. It's a belief that makes you feel good, and you don't want to lose that thing, do you? You don't want the rest of us, or society, or the university, or anybody on the other side to take it away from you. So you're kind of saying that you want us all to share that we all have to join with you in your belief, right? So that you don't have to lose that belief. Then the question I've got for you, Mr. Ms. Social Justice Warrior, is that free? Is it fair? Is it open? Or is the way you're approaching this kind of totalitarian, right? It's not really fair or free or open. It's all about your feelings, and you can't validate them with facts and scientific evidence, and so you just want us to go along with it because, my big bugaboo, you feel offended, whatever that means. It means hurt feelings, I guess, that we're shaking the ground that you stand on your beliefs, your liberal or your conservative leanings, and we are upsetting you because you have to work hard in your brain to think of a new way, to be open to crack that nut. So my insight into SJWs is that they have a kryptonite, right? There's this thing like Superman. When you hold this glowing green rock up to them, it destroys them. It pulls the rug out from under them. And what that kryptonite is to SJWs, I think, that thing that they're going to avoid at any cost, is self-examination of what validates their positions factually. It's the fact that when you turn this mirror on them and you make them take a very close look at themselves and stop long enough and get them step by step close enough to having to be self-reflective, they don't want that. They can't. They melt like Superman. They fall to the ground in powerlessness once you do that. So that's my insight into how to disempower SJWs and the fact that what you're dealing with social justice warriors is actually addiction. And I think we need to feel a little bit sorry for them, like we would for any addict. It's not their fault. They didn't choose to become addicted to this thing. They just got exposed to the feelings of it, and the feelings were so fantastic, they just couldn't say no to those feelings. And so now they're trapped in this ongoing loop of not being able to break out. And maybe by using this technique to disempower them, you force them to at least stop for a moment and be self-reflective. And maybe get out of the SJW loop and open their brains and start to learn about the real world and about what university can teach them and what looking at other sides of arguments can bring to them in a positive way. And maybe we'll do what is my goal, and that's to move people away from the right or the left and bring them closer to the center, because the center is what decides elections in the US and elsewhere. It is the centrists, the people in the middle, who stop and think about each side of the argument and agree that maybe we've got some good ideas from both sides and we can mix them up somewhere in the middle to make the world a better place. So thank you for watching and listening to the Madman Rants. If this made you go, aha, then I'm glad. Please like the video, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Better still, you could buy me a beer. If you're curious, you could go to, if you want to buy me a beer, you can go to my blogs, and there's a link there that you can contribute with PayPal to make a donation. Or you could go to Patreon, look me up on Patreon, and become a subscriber there, a supporter there. If you're curious about my opinions, you can look at my opinions about human nature at justonecynicsopinion.blogspot.com, or if you're interested about the future of marketing, where I think it's going, you can go to advertising business model redefined.blogspot.com. Yeah, a mouthful, I know, but you just have to type it in once and then you should be able to locate me, or just search for Kevin J. Leonard, leave the J in, that way you'll zero in on me and not all the other Kevin Leonards out there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll come back.